I'll start recording on my own here. That way we just have it, just in case. Okay, fantastic. So let's get into it, shall we? So the first question I want to answer for you before we really get into the language is, well, why do we study Koine Greek? Why do I spend years of my life torturing myself with what is sometimes a difficult language? Well, of course, the very obvious thing is that it's the language of the New Testament. When you read anything in the New Testament, from what Jesus had to say to Paul's epistles, to apostolic epistles, to the Revelation of John, for instance, all of that comes to us through this language, Koine, and has been translated now, of course, into English for our use today. And so some of you may or may not know this, but we actually do not have any of the original manuscripts, meaning we don't have any manuscript that has survived for us today that we would say, without a doubt, this is, early first century, right around the start of the early church, for instance. Rather, we have a lot of fragments and manuscripts that we see here, right? And this is actually a fragment of the Gospel of Mark. I believe this is chapter 1, actually, Mark 1. And this is what a lot of them look like. And we actually have thousands and thousands of these. Now, this one in particular that we're looking at on the screen is very old. It is dated to approximately the later half of the 2nd century. There's some debate it could be first half of the 2nd century. About 150 years or so after Jesus, maybe a little bit less. This is one of the oldest that we have. And what is kind of cool about Greek manuscripts is they don't just come from one time era, and they don't just come from one place. And this is kind of the important thing as to like why we as Christians, and I think not just ministry leaders or not just scholars such as myself, should have a grasp of Koine. Because look, like when you read your Bible, this is where it's coming from. And it's not that you will necessarily engage with these old fragments or manuscripts, but I think at the very least it gives you an appreciation for where the text came from and the work that people are putting in to make sure that we understand the text. So we have manuscripts as early as ones like this that we're looking at around 250 AD, a bit earlier, all the way to like very late Byzantine Empire. And they don't just come from like the Roman Empire, for instance, right? While many of the Greek manuscripts do come from the Roman Empire, they come from Egypt, they come from Syria, they come from both the Western and Eastern Roman Empire. Of course, you have in the East you have the Byzantine Empire, and in the West you have the Roman Empire, from tons of different places. And so when we look at like a fragment in Mark like this, we see certain words, right? You can identify certain words in the text. Of course, for you looking at it, might seem a little strange, but we can look at Mark 1 like this and then compare this to another text found in the Byzantine Empire, for instance, much later, and we compare them to each other and say, well, what does this early text say and what does this late text say? Do they differ? So that's kind of the work that we do and why we study Koine Greek. Now, the other thing, of course, that's a little bit more obvious, when you listen to sermons and your pastor brings up, hey, in the Greek, this is what this word means. It's good to just be able to follow along. I think that's one of the coolest things. You start to engage on a deeper level. All right, so in regards to the development of Koine itself, now some of you who are historians, you may know some of this stuff better than I do. I don't claim to be a historian. I am a Bible scholar and a linguist, but really where we get Koine is from the cousin of Alexander the Great's language. So many of you are likely aware of who Alexander the Great is. I mean, at the very least, I'm sure you've heard of him before. And effectively who he was a conqueror in a time that we call the intertestamental period, excuse me. The intertestamental period is simply the time at the end of the Old Testament and the time in between that and the start of the New Testament. There's approximately 400 years. And we have wide-scale changes in culture, in what empires are strong and what empires are weak, right? 400 years is a long time. And during that time, we have Alexander, who conquers everything you see in red here. And naturally, everything that will happen in the Bible, at least a large part of it, is kind of in this area, right? And spreads out later on. Churches, of course, pop up in other Greco-Roman areas and into, Asia Minor up here. And so Alexander's conquests kind of unite this huge piece of land, right, as you can see in red. And not only, effectively back then, and even today, if you were to conquer something this large, you will be adopting many different cultures and many different people into your empire. And so one of the ways in which empires should need to stay together is through the assimilation of culture, language, religion, right? These things that really bond people together. So, of course, just looking here, we can see, you have Macedon, you have Persia, Arabia is butting up to it here, Egypt has been conquered, Palestine and Israel in this area, Gaza, right? Very famous part of the world today. All the way butting up against India and the Himalayas up here. So you have this huge wide range of cultures that suddenly are within one empire. Well, how do you keep them together? Well, first of all, they don't speak the same language. So actually creating a language or a dialect that is spoken amongst the people is important. And that's how Koine kind of comes about. So Alexander and the Macedonians and the Greeks speak a different form of Greek. You may have heard of it like classical Greek, or there's Attic Greek, right? And so Koine is kind of a language, or kind of a cousin, of those languages. And so Koine, right, spelled like K. You're gonna have to excuse my horrible writing with this thing, but so Koine simply means common in Greek. It becomes the language of the common people. If you're living in Persia and you want to trade with people in Armenia, well, how do you communicate with each other? Well, Koine becomes that way in how you communicate. Some of you may be familiar with so there's a Greek translation of the Old Testament, and that is known as the Septuagint. And the Septuagint is abbreviated as the LXX, just like this, right? So maybe you've seen this before, the LXX. That simply means it is the Koine Greek translation of the Old Testament. So what happens when you have Jews living in the areas in which they live, and of course, after the destruction of the first temple in the Old Testament, there was what we call a diaspora. So Jews moved actually to many different parts of the world, and they have copies of the Torah or the New Testament, the Old Testament with them, but it's written in Hebrew, and now suddenly the culture is starting to speak Greek. So what do you need to do? Well, you translate those scriptures into Koine, and that's how we get the Septuagint. So that's kind of how this language became popular amongst Jews and Gentiles alike, as we see it in the New Testament. Now, it's likely that Jesus actually knew some Koine. We're not sure to what extent. That's something that's kind of ongoing, but he probably knew a good amount of Koine. Jesus was a very educated individual. And of course, depending on your theology, we won't necessarily, I don't want to get into this, but there are some that believe that, Jesus had prior knowledge about things, that the Holy Spirit gave him knowledge about certain things. And so, maybe he fully comprehended Koine. Who knows? But it is almost for sure that he had some cursory understanding of Koine. Okay, So that's kind of the background. Let's talk a little bit about what makes Koine different, like what distinguishes it from other languages, specifically other Greek languages. So, of course, as you are aware, our language, English, changes all the time. In fact, a lot of the slang that we will use today doesn't necessarily mean that we would have used it, 3-4 years ago. In fact, some of the slang that we use today, we probably wouldn't even have understood what those words meant 3 or 4 years ago. I'm thinking like, look, I'm not a boomer. I'm a millennial, and so if there's some Gen Z people here, you can probably help me out. But there's a lot of slang that like Gen Z use that I don't always understand. I'm just going to be honest, right? And there are words that are being adopted into like Merriam-Webster's dictionary on a consistent basis that go from being like slang or different terms to being actually kind of officially adopted into English. So I looked this up, and like a few of the words, for instance, are like BIPOC, right? So you may have heard of this recently, where we're speaking, when you say BIPOC, you mean Black, Indigenous, person of color. Okay, 4 or 5 years ago, if someone said BIPOC to me, I'd be like, what are you talking about? But today we understand what that means. Koine is very similar, and what makes Koine different from classical is a lot of that is vocabulary, right? So especially as you have Koine being a language that is kind of like assimilating multiple cultures, people from their cultures have their different style of speaking Koine and some vocab that they'll use. And this is actually reflected in the Bible. So again, what may surprise you is that within the Bible, there's different styles of language, right? As I'm sure all of you know, multiple different authors chipped in writing the New Testament. So we have like Paul, we have different apostles. There's arguments about who authored some books. The gospel authors. So there's plenty of different voices and plenty of different people from plenty of different walks of life that are chipping in and adding to basically what we have as the New Testament today. And they have different styles. So for instance, up here we have Mark and John. If you were to kind of get a good grasp of Koine and then read those Gospels in Koine, you would see that they have a very vernacular style, meaning they're super lax. They use slang. They're not always super, academic, let's say, or literary, right, is the word I chose to use. They're not always very literary in the way that they write. So, Mark, for instance, he uses terms that you could even argue aren't correct, but you still understand what he's trying to say. You can tell that Mark maybe isn't super familiar with Koine. He may be familiar with another type of Greek, but likely not super familiar with writing in Koine. On the other hand, you have Luke, right? I'm sure most all of you have read Luke and Acts. So this is why there's the hyphen. When in biblical scholarship, when we refer to Luke, it's almost accompanied with Acts. So you'll often hear biblical scholars say Luke Acts. And the reason being is because, of course, they're the same author, and they have a lot of similarities to each other, language being one of them. So if you've read the Gospel of Luke, you would know that the author, self-proclaimed kind of investigator, we hear that he's a physician, and so likely a highly educated person. Could be a Roman, for sure a Gentile. That's something certain. And so it's like, okay, there's no wonder this person has a much stronger grasp of Koine Greek. And so when you read Luke in Koine, they're very literary. They're very there's a process to it. They use vocabulary that might be a bit more complex. than other parts of the New Testament. So kind of the last and final way I will describe how Koine is distinct from its classical or Attic cousin is simply in its structure. So it is a very clear language. Now that doesn't mean it is simple, it is clear. And the clarity comes in using things like more compound words, right? So we'll often have an example of this is, we say, like I threw out the trash, right? So we use that verb through, that past tense verb through, and then we tack on out, right? Describing what you did to the trash. You threw it out. In Koine, it will take that and simply, basically use the word for throw, the verb for throw, which is ballon, right? Kind of looks like this, my crummy writing. And it will add this word throw to simply, the word out to simply the beginning, which is ek, right? So instead of using two kind of separate words, it will take this one action and just describe it in one word. Instead of ballo, which is I throw, ek ballo, I throw out, right? So that's one way in which Koine is much more clear. They use less conjunctions as well. So a conjunction, again, I'll just remind you, if you're not familiar with some of the terms that I'm using, please feel free to ask questions. I want to make sure you are on the same page as me, so that we can properly build off of things. But a conjunction simply means like the words that connect sentences and phrases together. So the word because, the word and, right? I went to the store and I picked up eggs, right? You're connecting those two ideas together with the word and. So in Koine, there's much less conjunctions, and meaning the conjunctions themselves have a wider meaning. So the word kai means and, but. It can also mean like kind of also in some categories, right? The word hoti means because, or that, or maybe both, because that, right? So those are some examples. And then simply there's just more pronouns, more prepositions. So more pronouns, it's like a pronoun would be like he, she, it, they, them, their, like all of those types of words. There's much more pronouns, and the point being is that pronouns in Koine tell you exactly who is speaking or who is being spoken about, right? It just gives a lot more meat to the clarity of the sentence. So you're like, okay, like Jesus is speaking about himself when he says the word I, like often in Koine there will be this term ego, which means I, right? Literally I. And this it'll be conjoined with a me, which is I am, right? Kind of looks like this. So I am. Well, you would never speak like this in English. You would never say I am great. Well, you would just say I am great. But there's more pronouns. This is a pronoun, so that you have much more clarity in who is doing what and who is saying what, right? Okay, so here's the fun part. We're going to go through the alphabet, and effectively by the end of this session, I want you to be able to, pronounce the alphabet, and that means you can start to pronounce words. You can it'll take you a little while to memorize kind of which letter is which sound, but you'll get there. And I promise the alphabet is really, really easy. If you put in a little bit of time, like literally half an hour of time to try to memorize the alphabet, you'll get it down without a doubt in my mind. So I'm just going to go through it quick, and again, if you have questions, please feel free to type in the chat. So first, we have alpha. Oh, and by the way, of course, the word alphabet, you can kind of see where it comes from now, right? Alpha and beta. Kind of cool. Anyway, so we have alpha, which just like his father, the A in father, ah. Beta, the B in bet. Gamma, which is the G in get. Now, something about gamma, when you're reading it, you often, if you just see this on its own, you will pronounce it like a G. But there is a very common word in which you will not pronounce it like a G, and that's when there's two gammas side by side like this. So there's this word angelos, right? Okay. Alpha, gamma, gamma, epsilon, lambda, omicron, sigma. Okay. So if you were to just pronounce this like you see here, it would be like agelos, agelos. But when there's two gammas beside each other, the first one will make an N noise. So angelos. Now, can anyone maybe in the chat there make a guess, or over voice, whatever you want, make a guess as to what the word angelos means? What English word does that sound like? Do we have a guess?
Angel?
Angel, yeah, that's exactly right. Yes, angels, yeah. Yeah, you guys are exactly right. So this word angelos means English, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was a good guess based on what we're talking about, right? So yeah, angelos is the word for angel, or other times it can be the word messenger, right? And of course we know that in the Bible, angels are often messengers. That's kind of their purpose, right? So it makes sense, angel or messenger. Very good, you guys. Very good. Okay, so moving along, we have delta, which is just the D in dog. Now there's two E's, and this can confuse some people. The first is epsilon, right? It looks just like this, and it's the E in epic, right? Eh. So it is the short E sound. Then we have zeta, which is just the Z in zoo. I flip-flop between saying Z and Z. That's like American culture, like, weighing on me. I know Americans say Z, but Canadians say Z. Then we have eta, and then this is the long E sound. So it, like epsilon is E, eta is A, right? Eh and A, eh and A, just like that EI sound. I find it interesting that some types of math use Greek. Yeah, totally, right? And we'll come to that. There's a really famous one that I'm sure you've seen already. So then we have theta, which is that TH noise, the, iota. So this is not iota, right? It's that E noise, E. Kappa is that hard C sound, like in car. Lambda is that L sound in lion. Moo, just like the sound a cow makes. Yes, it really is that stupid. Like mouse. Nu, just like in note. And then xi. So you may want to practice this one. It's like, it's not just an X noise, it's the X plus the I. Xi. Xi. I'm sorry if that sounds awful in the microphone, but you'll have to practice it on your own. So just like that X noise. Omicron, this is our first O. There's two O's. So this is the short O. Ah, like on. Right? Now here's the one you are thinking of. Here's the one you're thinking of. This is used in math all the time. You're looking at this and you're like, that's pi. That's what I thought too, but no, it is P. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, because I know you're disappointed, because I was disappointed when I first learned this. Yes, it is a plot twist. Very good. Yeah. And it's just the P sound input. So it's not pi. It is P. Like, I wrote it out here, right? Just like, you know, the P, like eating a pea. Okay. Rho is just that R sound. It looks like a P, right? Like an English P. You have to be very careful. It is the R noise. Now here's sigma. Sigma is very interesting. You may be looking at this like, what is going on here? It is just that S noise, but I'll show you an example. So with sigma, there's two different forms. So look at this first form of sigma, right? The first form of sigma pops up when sigma appears at the beginning or in the middle of a word. The other form appears at the end of a word. So in angelos, you can see my crummy sigma at the end, right? This is a sigma. And it appears like this one here because it appears at the end of the word. If it were to appear in the middle or at the front of a word, like this word sozo, which is sigma, omicron, zeta, sigma, omega, zeta, omega, sozo, which means I save. You can see the first form of sigma appears at the beginning, right? I'm so sorry my drawings are awful, but it is what it is. You have to live with it. Okay, moving on, we have tau, right? So just that T sound. This one can trip people up. This is upsilon, not upsilon. This can be confusing. It's not up, it's upsilon. So, and I gave the example like the double O sound, upsilon. Okay, almost done here. We have phi, not phi, phi. And it is that F noise. This is ki, right? It looks like an X, but it is that CH. Now, it's not the ch noise. It's not ch. It is k, right? Like lock. And you might get a bit phlegmy with this one because it does kind of come from the back of the throat. Lock, key, right? This is psi. This is a bit awkward to pronounce. It's like you're putting your lips together and then trying to pronounce the C noise. Psi. Like cups. Psi. Sorry again if that sounds awful in the mic. And lastly, we have the other form of O, which is omega, right? And it just looks like a W. I know it's kind of cut off at the end, but it just looks like, here it is. Here's the big example, right here. Looks like a W kind of. Now, if you remember, there are kind of parts in the Bible where Jesus is alluded to, or God is alluded to as being like the first, the beginning, right? Or excuse me, the first and the last, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, which obviously just refers to the beginning and the end of the Koine alphabet, right? So he is everything. He's all the language. He is anything you can conceptualize, right? So these kind of cool ideas. So here's how you would write out most of This is how you would write out a lot of these letters. This just gives you an example. I will provide a bit of like an exercise sheet if you want to work through a few things later on. I'll also be around afterwards to answer questions, chat with you guys. But I highly recommend practicing to write the language. And this just shows you like the size of the letters. What I'll say is, you guys, don't worry too much about capital letters. Do not worry too much about capital letters, okay? The reason being is because they are very, very seldomly used in the Greek New Testament. You know, I have a Greek New Testament here with me. When I open it up and read it, virtually all of the letters are in lowercase. The only time a letter is capitalized would be at kind of like the beginning of a book, right? The beginning of, say, like a new section, or the beginning of speech, and also proper names, of course. So often you'll have like words. All of it is in lowercase, like these letters up here, and then there might be a comma, and suddenly you have an uppercase alpha, right? And that just usually indicates either a proper name or that someone is beginning to speak. So that's the only time you kind of have to recognize uppercase letters. I highly recommend just focus on everything kind of like from here and up, right? These are all, and of course the full alphabet. These are everything that will get you by. Does anyone have any questions so far? I know it's like probably drinking out of a fire hose right now. Okay.
How do
Okay.
you spell the last second letter?
The second last letter, how do you spell it? Is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah,
Like, how do you pronounce it?
yeah. I guess it's no, it's like I guess it's third letter like uh
This one here? The key?
yeah.
Yeah, this is
Oh,
so this is key, like you're opening a door, like a key, right? So it's not the ch noise, it is the k. So key, and yeah, it looks a bit like an X, right? That's kind of how you'd write it. Don't get fooled. It's not an X. It is that k noise. Um, to give you an example, in this word Christos, yeah, someone knew what I was going to write, right? Christos, we have the ch noise, right? And of course, I'm sure whoever just said Christos, you know that this means Christ, right? So Jesus Christos is Jesus Christ. This means Christ or Messiah or anointed one, and that's an example of where that key is used. Thought I was muted. Oh, hey, no worries. You got it right. You knew I was gonna put Christos. Very good. So yeah, again, you guys, if you have questions about the alphabet, please, um, reach out. But I do think, as Renewed said in the chat there, this is digestible. It just requires a little bit of effort on your end, but I think you can get this down. You're smart folks. Okay, moving along here, just more pronunciation stuff. So there's not too much left to get through. Before we get to that, I just want to remind you of, just if you'll bring your attention over here, there are a bunch of letters that look similar to English letters. You have to be careful because these can trip you up. This, if you remember, this is an eta, a. It looks like an N, right? Mu, it looks like a U. Nu, looks like a V. Rho, looks like a P. Ki, looks like an X. And omega looks like a W. Just make sure that you're not making that mistake because you will start to pronounce incorrectly and you won't fully understand what's going on. Again, that'll just require a little bit of getting used to. Okay, I just want to talk about something called diphthongs mainly. So, for any of you that have studied language, diphthong simply means when two vowels are connected to each other, like this. You don't pronounce both vowels separate. You pronounce them together. If someone thinks omega looks like a W, you need to get the right. You know what, my friend? I hate to admit that when I was first learning Koine, I thought this was a W all the time. Maybe I suck. I don't know. So now I just tell students all the time to keep an eye out for that. Okay, so just to show you a few diphthongs, these are all of the ones in Koine. If two vowels appear together and they're not supposed to be pronounced in a diphthong, they will have basically two dots like this, and you will know to pronounce them separately, but almost always you'll pronounce them with one kind of breath. So the alpha iota is just pronounced like I. So an example is iro, which means I lift. The epsilon iota is like wait, a, right? And a means if. Oi, that omicron iota, right? Oi is just like boil. And this word here is pronounced oi ki a, right? So notice in this word we have two sets of vowels that are connected to each other. One of them is a diphthong, this one of them is not. Okay? You have to memorize, I shouldn't say you have to memorize, but you should be familiar with this list as well to know when you pronounce those two vowels together. So that it's not oikia. You would have to, if you wanted to properly pronounce, it's oi ki a, right? You just break that up into kind of like your breaths. Oi, ki, a, which means house. Okay, the alpha and the upsilon is like the ow in sauerkraut. Ow, crow, okay? And this is a pronoun, ow, toss, right? Have your diphthong, ow, tau is just that T sound, and os, ow, toss, which means he, she, or it. U, just like in soup, so this would be ude. U, you pronounce the diphthong, and de, it just means neither. To left, you have that we noise, sweet. We. Is it recorded? Yes, this is recorded. Yep. So you'll be able to look at this. Oh, could you break down what a vowel is, please? Well, okay. So there are two. Basically, there are two types of letters. There are consonants, and there are vowels. All of these here that you see are vowels. So a vowel is like, well, you can't pronounce anything without vowels. You could almost say they're kind of like the flavor text of the word, right? I'm not totally sure how else to explain it to you. If the consonants are the kind of skeleton, the vowels are the meat. They kind of carry you through pronouncing those consonants. It's the same reason why, actually, if you're familiar with the tetragrammaton Yahweh, right, which is YHWH, it's actually impossible to pronounce this. This is how it shows up in the Old Testament. This is God's name in the Old Testament. You can't pronounce this, and that was done intentionally. There's no vowels. Later on, vowels were added in to be able to pronounce it. So that's kind of the point of vowels, is they carry you through the consonants. And so all of these are the vowels. You have the alpha, iota, epsilon, omicron, upsilon. Is there any I missed? Now these are often the short vowels. Some of the long vowels are the eta, right, which is that A noise. It's not the A. And then there is a long O, which is the omega. All right. Oh, I think someone's unmuted there. Could you just mute? Make sure you're muted so I can't hear the echo. Thank you. Great. Yeah. So there are a few long vowels. Again, I'll just go back for a second and show you. So these are the vowels: alpha, epsilon, eta, iota, omicron, upsilon, omega down here. Is there any I missed? Did I miss one? I feel like I did. No, that looks about right. Okay. So again, when you go through, make sure that you recognize vowels and consonants. So just finishing up with this, as I said, this upsilon iota is like that we noise. So we pronounce this huios. I'll give you an introduction to breath marks later, which indicate where you would pronounce an H. But just looking at this is like uios. Uios. Now you need the H, so it's huios, and you get that we noise, which just means sun. Okay, and lastly we have the epsilon, upsilon, which is the ew noise, feud. So this would be pronounced like ew thus. Ew thus, right? Means immediately. Okay? Again, this is all recorded. Okay, so this is the last big thing that I just want to talk about, and then we can ask questions, we can have discussion, we'll be done. So I just want to talk about punctuation a little bit. First off, this is what Koine text looks like. You are currently looking at John 1:1 and John 1:2. And arche ein ho logos, yep, exactly. So this means in the beginning, he was the Word, and the Word, he was with the God, and God, he was the Word. Okay, you get the idea. So you're probably looking at this going like, oh my goodness, there's so many like markings. It's not just letters. That is true, but I'll show you very quickly how we can start to break these down. So you may have noticed that in Koine there are no H's, right? So in the alphabet there's no H's, and as I just alluded to, there are breathing marks that indicate where an H will go. So there's two types of breathing marks. The first is a rough breathing mark, and that would be like that H sound. And it kind of just looks like a floating backwards comma, right? It kind of looks like that. So that indicates the H noise goes on the beginning of the word. The opposite is a smooth breathing mark, right? Kind of looks like a comma. And the H, or the breathing, kind of is like woven through the word, okay? So to give you an example, we have two words here, arche, right? I'll show you into other examples, but first we have arche, and we can see the breathing mark above the alpha, right? We have alpha, rho, chi, and eta. So arche. And so the H, there is no H on the beginning, even though there is a breath mark. You look at this and you say, okay, that's a smooth breathing mark. And so that H noise kind of travels through the word per se, right? And so it's not harke, it's arche. And you're kind of exhaling as you say the word, okay? It's good to be practicing this, with your mics muted, of course, for the meantime. And then over here we have a rough breathing mark. And this is simply the word ho, which means the. It's an article, it means the. Now, as you can see above it, it has a rough breathing mark. It's kind of that backwards comma. And so that means the H sound goes on the beginning of the word. So we can add an H onto the omicron. So it's not o logos or a logos. It's ho, right? The H sound is very distinct before that omicron. So en arche ein ho logos. Okay? Again, if you have questions, feel free to ask. Next, the last thing that you just need to keep in mind for pronunciation is few very simple things to do with punctuation. So, give you an example. If you look over here, I'll use a different color this time. Commas and periods are the exact same. Easy peasy, right? So when you're reading this, you can look and say, oh, there's a comma. Okay, there's a comma. Here's a period. Super, 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 super simple. I think you guys will pick up on that very easy if you've read a single book in your life. All right? Next, semicolons and colons simply look like this, right? They have a raised dot. You can see this raised dot. So it's almost like a period. So if we look down here at logos, it's almost like if the period was floating up the word. That would be like a colon or a semicolon. Now, the really stupid way in which I learned this, I kind of put it in my brain, was that, in English semicolon is kind of like this, right? That's what a semicolon looks like if this was, a filled in dot. A semicolon in Greek is truly a semicolon, meaning this is only half of it there, meaning it's just the floating dot. It is a true semicolon. Get it? Haha. Yeah. I'm super lame, but that's how I learned it a while back. And lastly, a question mark then in Koine looks like an English semicolon. Okay, so this can be where some confusion sets in. You aren't super lame. I appreciate that. Okay, so this word huios, right? Huios, which means sun. The English-looking semicolon is a question mark. So this would be like you're saying, like, sun? Like, maybe sun? Where are you, right? Okay. So what would be a good way to start is for you folks, and I've provided you with some Greek text. As we're moving forward, I want you to simply look at some Greek text, which again, it'll be in an exercise sheet that I'll provide. And this is if you really want to learn. If you don't really care and you're just enjoying these sessions, that's totally cool. This isn't like school or anything, but for those of you that maybe are like, whoa, this is super cool, you want to learn, there's a few exercises that'll be really helpful for you to start learning. The first is to just take a text like this, right? So you take a bit of a block of text and you just go through it and identify all the markers. So you just go through and say, okay, that's a smooth breathing mark, smooth breathing mark. I will show you, this is an accent, right? Smooth breathing mark, accent, like you get the point. You just make your way through, you say, okay, there's a comma, and that way you start to familiarize yourself. So not only are you marking up the text, but then you can also practice pronunciation. So it's totally okay if you have no idea what any of this says. You don't have to know what NRK means. It means in the beginning, but you don't have to know that. You can just practice pronunciation. That way it's easier to identify and remember some words that I will teach you eventually. Okay? So just to give you an example reading this, you would say, En arche ein ho logos kai ho logos ein pros ton theon kai theos ein ho logos u, remember the diphthong here, u tos ein en arche pros ton theon. Okay? If you can get to a place where you can comfortably pronounce Koine Greek at a similar pace to what I just did, you're sitting pretty and you're really setting yourself up for success. Okay. So the other thing to mention, you guys, is that breathing marks are important to identify, because if you look at this, you say, well, these two words, they look exactly the same, right? This is kind of my conclusion, by the way. We say, okay, these two words look exactly the same. Well, one has a breathing mark and one doesn't. It's important to recognize and know that breathing marks can distinguish words for you, because, for instance, this ein, or en, means in. It's the preposition in, okay? En can also mean if. So you don't want to get confused, and back here you don't recognize the breathing mark, right? You can't recognize the breathing mark, and you read this, if in the beginning he was the word, right? That's very different. If in the beginning he was the word is very different from saying in the beginning he was the word, or it was the word, or the word was, right? Something along those lines. Okay, so it's important to recognize those. So just a reminder, if you were to read this, ein ho logos, right? So the word was, okay? You want to note the smooth and rough breath marks. You want to be able to name and pronounce each letter. Okay, so you would go through and you'd identify all of the markings. You want to be able to identify each letter, say, okay, that's an eta, this is a nu, this is an omicron, so on and so forth. Then you want to be able to pronounce the phrase confidently, right? You can look at this and say, this is ein ho logos. And then, don't worry about a rough translation. This will be for later. But I just want you folks to be able to do this. Okay? Markings, pronunciation and naming of letters, and then being able to pronounce the phrase. Okay? And I think for some of you that want to take this on, it's a very achievable goal. So that kind of brings us to the end. There's also a bit of a vocab list if you want to start learning some words. So here are some articles that mean the. Kai, you can learn to mean and. De means but. Gar means for. Theos, which I'm sure some of you know. This is how we get the word theology, right? Theo means God, and ology means study of. Anthropos, which means human or man, and cosmos, which means world or universe. All right, so I will provide. I've given you my lecture notes, and I will give you the recording of this, and I will also give you this presentation. That way, you have plenty of resources to start working through this first stuff. I do sort of question myself if I can understand what to do or how to pronounce in a rough scenario or smooth scenario. Forgive me if you said it. Yeah, so just a reminder about the breathing marks. Where are you going to post the resources? I'll post it in this Koine study, and I'm sure one of the mods will pin it. So, okay, so as for your question for rough and smooth, a rough breathing mark, as you can see it, I'm pointing to this example here around the O. It's like a floating backwards comma, right? Looks like that, and it just means the H is heavily pronounced before. Ho, and a smooth is just kind of looks like a floating actual comma, kind of like that, and the H sound kind of comes through the word. Okay, so the difference being you would pronounce like over here with the smooth breath marks, this is like ain, right? You're exhaling through, and with the rough, it is ho. It's that really rough H sound. Makes sense. Yeah, good. How important is super accurate pronunciation to be able to so I'm of the opinion you need to be accurate, especially if you're working in a team. And the other thing is that you need to be accurate because if frankly, if you're learning something incorrectly and then you ever try to talk to someone else or teach someone else, right? Because like, let me give you one example. And this example doesn't really have too many consequences, but look at the word like logos, right? A lot of people pronounce this like logos. In English, we would pronounce it like logos. This is logos, right? It's those short O's. So you just want to make sure you're accurate, and you don't want to say to someone, "Oh yeah, like the logos," right? Well, some people probably understand what you mean, but I just think accuracy is important, especially if you want to talk about something as complex as Koine. Now, the other thing is that if you're speaking to someone who knows Koine, you need to pronounce things that sound similar correctly. Take this, for instance. This is ain and n, okay? So as we can see, both have the E sound and that N noise on the end, right? Eta here, what is that? And then epsilon. Or sorry, the eta is the A and the epsilon is the right? So you have to be careful because you don't want to say ain, that switches what the meaning of the sentence is. It's ain, rk. Okay, so you do have to be careful. Will this course get into declensions? Yes. Declensions will happen next time. Declensions are... I mean, look, there's already so much information that I've just introduced to you in an hour. I think that just getting into declensions today would be way, way, way too much. I think we just need to start making sure that people know the alphabet, we're pronouncing things correctly, and we're starting to learn some basic words, right? Anything else? Any other questions? Because that's it from me, and I will post this stuff for you guys right away. Groovy, can't wait. Yeah, declensions are fun. Like, I mean, when you're first learning them, they're not that fun, but once you can learn declensions and you can look at a noun and kind of really know what it means and know what it's telling you, it's really cool. That'll be actually next week, if enough people are interested in having a second week. But I'm super glad that we had like 12 people come out. Super cool. What language is Koine closest to? Koine would be kind of like a precursor to modern Greek. Latin, like there are similarities, but I wouldn't necessarily say they are like cousins, like maybe modern Greek would be. There are similarities with Koine. Like next week, for instance, again, if you guys come back, we'll talk about like what does it mean for, say, theos. Let's take this word theos to be, masculine, right? So this is masculine, singular, and a word we call nominative. So, what does that mean? Well, in other languages like German and other Latin languages, Italian, Spanish, they use like grammatical categories like masculine and feminine. Few of the letters look similar to Hebrew. Yeah, I mean, I could see how you'd say that, like the eta, and maybe the tau, stuff like that. Yeah, the key. Yeah, the X one, the key. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, the key does look like LF. Yeah, LF. Yeah, alpha and LF. I feel sort of to know words and memorize what they are. It'll definitely take me a while for sure. I have to ask: is it common for English writers to write Greek letters incorrect? Yeah, it is. Again, if we go back to up here, I showed some examples of common. You have the Koine letter on this side and the English letter on this side. Common Koine letters that look very similar to English but aren't, and you can get them mixed up. Do you know any cheap Greek New Testaments to buy? Okay, so I'm not sure how helpful this would be to you. I do actually, and I just bought a new Greek New Testament. I'm just gonna grab it. 1 second. 1 second. It's right behind me. Okay. So I actually don't know where I put it right now, but I do have another one I'm holding. This one is the scholarly one though, and I'll be honest, this one is not cheap. Reason being is because inside of it, I can look up any verse you'd like in the New Testament, and it shows me all of what we call the textual variants. Meaning, if let's say there's two manuscripts existing of one Koine verse, and those two manuscripts disagree on what the word might have said, or maybe there's a different spelling for that word. It shows me here all of those places. So it's pretty pricey, but it is called the Greek New Testament, 5th Revised. Here, I'll type it in chat actually. The Greek New Testament, 5th Revised edition with dictionary, and it is by what we call the UBS, and the UBS in scholarly circles is one of the most important kind of committees on working on the Greek New Testament. I would love to work for these folks one day. So it's just called UBS 5. So if you look up that, I'm sure you can find it on Amazon. As far as I remember, it does not come cheap though. A lot of good information in there. Thank you for taking the time to teach us Koine Greek today. I'll definitely be here next week for the second. Yeah, ciao. Yeah. Have a great night. Thank you for using my people's language. Ciao. Have an excellent evening. If again, you guys, like, I don't have to bounce right away. If you guys have questions, even if you want to speak over voice chat, I'm more than happy to help. However, I am going to end the recording here.